While the majority here in this room is still waiting for their lunch, I see already the first ones eating, and I thought that I'm the only person in this room who had ever eaten insects. We were just talking, Paul, Rozin, and I, about our experiences in Sri Lanka, where you can buy extracts from insects to enrich your vegetarian food. And I thought I was the only one who ever ate termites. No, I just learned that there is a person who is much more experienced, and I hope he will tell us and shares some of his experience. That's, of course, also more anecdotal. But Paul Rozin is, of course, a very important scientist from Penn University in Philadelphia. And I want to welcome him not as an expert in eating insect food, but as the chairman of the department. And Frau Sprösser will introduce him and tell him what an eminent scientist Paul is. Paul, thank you for coming. And I think I'll leave it to you.
Yeah. Okay, so dear ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure and honor for me to welcome Professor Dr. Paul Rozin from the University of Pennsylvania today in Constanz. He will give a talk on the topic, the psychology of human food selection. But first of all, let me say some words about Professor Rozin and the impact of his work on the field. So Professor Rozin played a central role in bringing the topic of normal, that is non-pathological eating behavior into psychology. For instance, in this graph, you can see how often the word eating appeared in textbooks. There was a sharp rise beginning in the 60s. I think you can't see it, but there's the 60s. And maybe it's not by chance that this was the time when Professor Rozin finished his PhD in biology and psychology at Harvard University and started his academic career. Professor Rozin began his groundbreaking research with the leading expert, Professor Sean Mayer, on a very basic level in studying the food intake of goldfish. Since then, he has published hundreds of papers in international top journals such as Science, which have been greatly received by the scientific community with thousands of citations. Professor Rozin investigated human food choice with an incredible creativity from a biological, psychological, and anthropological perspective. For instance, Professor Rozin investigates ambivalence to food, such as to chocolate or meat. He also investigates the development of food preferences and aversions, for instance, how we get to like the taste of chili peppers or coffee. One of his foci is cultural psychology, comparing food attitudes in a number of cultures, for example, in the US, France, India, or Japan. And the result were provocative writings, such as Why We Are So Fat and the French Are Not. And probably Professor Rozin will talk more about this topic in his presentation. So Professor Rozin is also the leading expert in the investigation of disgust, and I'm sure he will tell you some facts about eating insects you didn't know before. Professor Rozin's expertise concerning food selection is also underlined by the fact that he was editor of the journal Appetite for 10 years. So, however, Professor Rozin's extensive expertise is not at all limited to human food choice, but he's also done excellent work in positive, evolutionary, social, and developmental psychology, also in individual differences and behavior genetics, and psychopathology and psychotherapy. His work was multiply awarded. For example, he received the Distinguished Contribution Award by the American Psychological Association. He's fellow of the American Psychological Society, the Society of Personality and Social Psychology, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and so on. His work was supported by all important grant agencies, such as the National Science Foundation or the National Institutes of Health. And as one of the internationally most renowned experts, he has endless connections and invitations from all over the world. I'm sure I didn't get all of them here on the map.
It's okay.
Yeah, his work has also been well received by all major public media, such as New York Times or Psychology Today. And he was also advisor in the advisory board of the Sesame Street. So besides all this excellence, Professor Rozin is an outstanding teacher and mentor who received multiple awards for his teaching. He gave me the chance to come to Philadelphia and learn from his extensive knowledge. And I was also able to attend his classes and get to know how he teaches his students, not only scientific knowledge, but also the experience of eating by, for example, tasting different sweeteners, as you can see here. Or we also visited a pig and dairy farm to get more knowledge about the experience of eating. Professor Rozin had a profound impact on me, and I want to express my endless gratitude to Professor Rozin for his incredible kindness in being my mentor. And yeah, thank you for coming to Konstanz and sharing your thoughts with us. Please welcome with me Professor Rozin. They will change it. Okay, so.
Entschuldigen mir, aber ich kann nicht gut Deutsch sprechen, so ich spreche in English. How do you?
Help you?
Yeah, just didn't see the connection. Ich bin, I'm an old man. I don't know how to connect things. You know, that's young people push plugs and things. Okay. Let me say, first of all, thank you for that very generous introduction. It's been my pleasure to meet Gudrun and to start working with her, and also with Britta Renner and her group. I've had a wonderful time talking with them, changing ideas, and I look forward to further contact. Also, I have a postdoctoral fellow who's American, but he's fluent in German, and he's very excited about having a link. So I have to get on to. I'm on the wrong. Let's see. I have to. This is PowerPoint 2013. So I have to think for a moment. That's my. There we go. Okay, thank you. I'm going to tell you a lot of things because I want to make contact with as many of your interests as possible. So my talk is too long, and I'll stop when the time is over. And I've been cutting. I've been cutting and cutting and cutting, but I've ran out of time to cut. So let me start with a few points. Okay, first of all, I want to thank my subjects. You know, we always thank our graduate students or our undergraduates, but nobody thanks the people who provided the data. So I want to start with that. I like to break traditions in my work, and I also want to break some traditions in presenting. I also want to thank my stimuli. And two of the most important stimuli in my research on disgust are up there. And Adolf Hitler has been very useful to me because nobody wants to wear his sweater. And I use that fact to understand what is transmitted by people to their clothing. Okay. Generally speaking, though psychology is moving very rapidly, we still leave things out. That is to say, there are many things that we don't study, and I try to study the things that we don't study. And there's lots of them. One of them is food. So this is now 6 introductory psychology texts, 6 of the major English language texts. And I looked in the index, and I just looked at how many pages they cite for the following words: work, business, money, food, eating, except for eating disorders and obesity. play, sports, religion, anything political, war, music, art, novels, fiction, literature. The total number of pages, the median number of pages for all of those things, which are everything humans do except sex and sleep, which psychologists love for some reason. I'm not sure why they love sleep. I understand sex. Only 3 pages. In a 650-page book, there's only 3 pages that refer to any of those things. So there's a lot of work to do. One of the things that is not discussed is why people eat. The only thing they discuss is why people eat badly, but not why they normally eat. And by the way, just say attribution alone gets 8 citations in the same book. Just one not unimportant social process. Okay, so the person who I look to get inspiration is Solomon Asch, who is, I think, the great social psychologist of the 20th century. His 1952 book, Social Psychology, is still the best book in the field, I believe. And he understood, he was a Gestalt psychologist, a nice German word, a movement that started in Germany. Asch was the social psychology piece of Gestalt psychology, along with a few other people, not just Asch, but he emphasized how important context was. And that's what Gestalt psychology was about, that you can't just take something out of a normal sequence. You can take it out and study it, but you have to be aware that you have removed the context and understand how important the context is. And that's extremely important in the area of food. Now, one thing that psychologists don't study besides food is fads. Why things get very, people all get excited about something. So, for example, what fads do is they narrow the focus of what is of interest to a field. This is true of it's true of psychology, it's true of everyone. It's true of clothing fashions, things like that. So here, for example, psychoanalysis was a central fad in psychology early in the 20th century. And what happens to fads often is they not only disappear, but they get rejected actively. Because when they become very popular and you see problems with it, you throw out the whole thing, which is silly. Next one was behaviorism, which of course was counter to psychoanalysis, but also everyone did that, and then they sort of said psychoanalysis shouldn't even be taught. And then we, of course, now have a bunch of them, which I'll mention in a minute, but so the feature is that if you oversell something, which happens with every fad, and sometimes it's appropriate in a way to get people focused on something really good, where you have new techniques, say, but there's overkill comes after it. That is, when it declines, they really punch it. Okay. So here, for example, is from Google Ngram. These are the mentions of behavior theory as a function of year. Percent of all English language book mentions of the word behavior theory, which is behaviorism. And you see it peaks and then it goes way down. This is Gestalt psychology, and you see it never really became that popular. And the reason is partly that probably the three great Gestalt psychologists, you could argue about that, Wolfgang Köhler, Hans Wallach, and Solomon Asch, were all at the same place, Swarthmore College in Philadelphia. A wonderful college, but they don't have graduate students. So they didn't train a next generation of graduate students. So little things like that can matter. I was at Harvard when Skinner was there, and I wasn't part of his group, but his group they were like, people who had found a new religion, and they would talk like Skinner. They would say, my behavior isn't contingent on the reinforcements you might offer. That was a typical sentence, instead of saying, I'm not going to be influenced by you. So there was, really passionate. Okay. Here, by the way, the fads, this is medical health fads. This is the frequency of mention of sugar. We'll leave it here, and you see it's declining. It's going to go up. It's going up again. This is only the 208. This is cholesterol on the way down, and this is antioxidants on the way up. Because you can't have too many risk factors or promoters. And each one has its own group of promoters, and if they're good at promoting it, they always have something reasonable behind the thing. There was something reasonable behind psychoanalysis and behaviorism, but the exaggeration is the problem. Here are the current 4 fads that I know in psychology. This is the frequency from 1975 to 2008. There's evolutionary psychology. Here is positive psychology. Here is cognitive neuroscience. And here is cultural psychology. So these are our 4 current affairs. They're all good. But they all think that everybody else should drop what they're doing and do what they do. Okay. Now, this picture, I don't know what happened. I have this slide was not showing fully, and I've tried to fool around with it, and I can't do it. But anyway, this is just a quick picture of another hole in psychology that I'm just doing a little work on. It's clothing. Clothing is very important. We have a whole psychology of how you get impressions of other people. Right? You meet somebody, what do you think of them? Lots of work. They don't look at clothing. Clothing is one of the most informative things about a person. Less for academics than the rest of the world. But for most of the world, it is. And there's no literature, virtually nothing. It's not mentioned in social psychology texts. So we did a study. This is with Katrina Fincher, a graduate student at Penn. And we got a woman, who you can't see fully here, who is half African-American, half white. So she has features of both. And we dressed her and photographed her in 4 different kinds of clothing, all reasonable clothing. And we asked people what they thought about her after. It was between subjects. You only saw one picture. And then we said, well, do you think this person is intelligent, aggressive, like sports, all these things? And turned out, in this study at least, we tinted her dark or light in Photoshop. So there's the black version, here's the white version. So in any event, we found that it was an enormous effect of what people thought about her based on her clothing. It was bigger than the race effect. And we can't get this published because people say, what are you doing that for? Okay, so I want to leave the subject to talk about something else just briefly because this is a German audience and this is a very German thing. I'm personally Jewish, and I have no one in my family was directly involved in the Holocaust, but I'm totally happy in Germany. I like the language. I don't have anything, but a lot of American Jews, I've noticed, are very upset about anything. They don't want to travel to Germany, things like that. Here we are, 50, 60 years after the Holocaust. So I thought, and I know one Holocaust. I know 2 Holocaust survivors quite well. And one of them in particular she was in Auschwitz for 2 years, and she doesn't have any German aversion. She doesn't like Nazis, but she can go to Germany. She's a singer. She sings German lieder. And I said, gee, all these people, Jewish people in the United States who've had no bad events personally in the Holocaust, no family events, are quite anti-German. And here's someone who had a terrible 2 years, lost her whole family, and she's okay. How could that be? So we did a study on this, and we got 30 Holocaust survivors in the United States, most of them from Eastern Europe. And we asked them simply, these are people, some of them are native English speakers. So it was very simple. We just told them an experience, and it was on a card in front of them, and said, are you comfortable or uncomfortable with each of these activities? And I'll give you an example in a moment. Or we said, here they're riding in a new Volkswagen. Is that okay? And some of them, no, and other people said, of course. And hearing the German language, but we had 15 of these, okay, handling Deutsche Marks, all kinds of stuff. And then we had another set of items, which were, would you be comfortable living next door to each of these people? And we had 15 people with all German in some way. Here's an example, a 25-year-old German male whose grandfather was a German army soldier who served in France. Or an 80-year-old German man who was an executive in a German corporation during World War II. So now we have someone who was at least involved in some way, participating potentially. This person is 2 generations away from the war. And we found people who were really uncomfortable about that. And other people said, how could I be uncomfortable? We had this full range in the Holocaust survivors. So I just want to show you one graph. This is I don't like showing complicated graphs, but this is the most complicated graph today. What this is we had, this is the cumulative number of subjects. We have 30 American Holocaust survivors, 30 Czech Holocaust survivors who were living in Prague, and 150 American Jewish college students. okay? And since this is the cumulative number of people, so obviously to get 150 students, every point represents 5 students. Each of these other ones represent 1 person, but we collapse the 150 to put them on the same graph. So we see the percent of people, this is the percent of people you were discomforted with, running from Joseph Goebbels, one extreme, to someone who was an American pediatrician of German ancestry. His family had been in the United States for generations, right? And so let's just first take a look at the Holocaust survivors, which is here up at the top. So you see a lot of them are completely, they don't want to be near anyone who has had anything to do with Germany, even if they were an American citizen during World War II. And we have, more importantly, we have 4 of them down here who are only averse to Nazis. They have perfectly okay. And then we have all these people in between. So this is the cumulative number out of the 30. Now we look at the Czech survivors. They are much more comfortable with Germans. Look at them down here, see? They're way different from the, and then we have the students who are in between. The students, the American Jewish students, are more anti-German than the Czech Holocaust survivors. How do you explain that? Well, I don't want to go into this. This is a whole lecture. But let me just say 2 things. The Czech Holocaust survivors are all fluent in German. They all knew Germans before World War II. They had relationships with Germans. So for them, a German was not a concentration camp god. But the Eastern European, most American ones, they had never met a German before. For them, a German was the people in the guards in the concentration camp. They didn't have another framework. And it's interesting because we had 5 Holocaust survivors in the United States sample who were German. They were German Jews. They were less negative to Germans than the people who had never met a German before. And the other thing we found that was interesting is those people who believe that Germanness is an essential property. That is to say, if you're a German, there's something in you that makes you a German. And similarly, if you're French or other things. So we give them a question like, once a German, always a German. Do you believe that? That predicts how negative you'll be. And that's interesting because that could explain, if you believe that, why the grandson of a World War II active German is someone you're still aversive to. So we were interested in this because we had a lot of trouble publishing this too, by the way, because people wanted us to get a clear mechanism. And we said, look, we've only got 2 groups of 30 survivors. We can't do a full regression and all those things you want us to do, but we can suggest some things. Okay, I just wanted to tell you that because I think that I will say one more thing. I believe it's healthier to contain your negativity, because why should you carry a negativity to any group through your life when the people alive now have nothing to do with what you're. But this is very characteristic in ethnic conflicts. That's how I got into this. In ethnic conflicts, people are upset about a group that maybe 400 years ago, someone from that group, some subgroup of that massacred some people, and now 400 years later, you don't like the people. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So we're trying to understand that. Okay, now we're going to go to food, finally. So this is what I call a mouth's eye view of eating. From the point of view of your body, something is coming into you. And it's really, if you think about it, you should care deeply about what comes into you. If nothing comes in, you're dead. But if the wrong thing comes in, you can also be dead. So there's a lot of people care deeply about what goes in their mouth. Think about, I'll just give you a little example. You go to a public restroom in a train station. You turn the doorknob, right, to go in. Imagine turning the doorknob with your mouth. What a terrible idea, because your mouth is so sensitive to things that are bad that might come in. Your hand isn't so sensitive, fortunately. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to go to the bathroom in public. Okay, you probably all know this, but let me just mention that if you are interested in what humans do, for most of the world, food is the most important thing you should be looking at. So this is in the 1980s. We don't have more recent, but India and China, which is already a third of the world, they spend about half of their total income on food. We spend, and now it's less than 10% in Americans on food of their total. So you see, there's a totally different world. If the price of something goes up in India, you have a problem in living. Whereas we have no problem. We'll take 2% out of our leisure budget and put it into food. And there are other countries in between. I just took India and China because they're the big two. Similarly, this is an old study from 1976 that nobody knows, in which they had people keep diaries in many cultures, more than the ones I have here, of what they were doing all day long. And they found that the consuming activity was sleep, 36.7% of the time. Next was work, 16% of the time. That number is so low because at that time, women didn't work much in the way of the standard work, and they didn't count taking care of the family as work in doing this study. So that number would be almost doubled now. And the third thing was food and food with it. Then leisure, other chores. Obviously, this is much bigger in developed cultures. It's the main expense of Germans and Americans and French is spending money on, just enjoying yourself. Okay, now, this is a subject I wasn't going to talk about, but I thought it would be of interest to you. And as a result of this, I'm probably not going to get to talk about the French. But I thought since this isn't published, and some of you have read some of my work, how we did this. So I was invited on February 3rd, 2012. I got an email saying, would I give a talk to the Great Chefs Conference in Copenhagen, which meets every August, late August. Would I do that? They covered my costs and so on. So I answered within about 10 milliseconds, yes, because I love food. And the invitation came from Rene Redzepi, who's the chef of Noma, which is sometimes ranked as the world's greatest restaurant, and sponsors this. So I went to this best meeting ever for me. And the meeting started with a day in which we were outside. Fortunately, the sun was shining in Copenhagen. And 6 or 8 of the world's greatest chefs each got a table. And they brought in a side of beef and all kinds of fish and everything. And they each were said, just make something good. No recipes, improvise. And you could watch them or help them cut. Here's one of the chefs working right here. And, the big name chefs were doing this. And we spent the whole afternoon with them preparing it. Then we sat down for a banquet, eating all the food they made. What a way to start a meeting, huh? The meeting itself was 2 days long. It was in a tent that they put up on a field with nice stands. It was actually good video and everything. And it was just terrific. People were mostly chefs, but others. I was one of 3 academics there out of 500. And that was a pleasure. And they were talking about making food. The reason I'm telling you this is that I said to myself, what can I tell these people that's useful to them? What do I know in psychology? And that made me think a lot and give a talk like nothing I've given before. And I did it with my son, Alexander, who is a chef and a music theorist. Both. This was the name of the talk. And I just want to talk about a few things. And the basic issue was, what do we know in psychology, and also, it turns out, about music, that might help a chef in making a meal more memorable? That was what we were particularly interested in. And the first thing I mentioned to them is, you want your people who eat in your restaurant to be pleased and happy and all that, right? Yeah, of course. Well, what do you want them, what's more important for you? To have them have a great time at the meal, or to have a great memory for the meal? And they said, what? I said, well, it's not the same. As some of you know from Kahneman and Fredrickson's work, your memory is not an accurate record of your actual experience. So you might do different things if you are interested in maximizing the memory of your meal. And your memory is very critical because you live with your memory for the rest of your life. You only have the meal for, depending on where you're eating, for 1 to 6 hours. Ferran Adria was at that meeting, the chef of El Bulli, and my meal, it was 6 hours long. But anyway, and when you tell someone, I had a great meal at this restaurant, it's your memory of the meal that you're referencing, not the meal, right? It's your memory. Okay, so you all, I hope, know, because I'm not going to go to this general distinction between experienced, remembered, and anticipated pleasure. It comes from Bentham and other people, but it was really developed nicely by Daniel Kahneman and Barbara Fredrickson. So let me just give you a couple of things that pieces of research we did, just a couple things. So we asked people, when I go to my favorite restaurant, I choose to order A, my favorite item on the menu, or B, a new item that I have never tried. This is work done with Xuan Gao, who's a Chinese graduate student, and Gal Zauberman, who's a professor in the marketing department of Wharton. Okay, so how many of you would answer that question? A. How many would do B? Okay, it's pretty close to 50-50. That's why it's interesting. Okay, so let me just do an analysis of that. Let's look at the anticipated pleasure. If you get your favorite food, you're going to have a great anticipation. You know it's great. You can look forward to it. You can image it, and you know it's going to be good. If you get a new food, you're going to anticipate it because it's a good restaurant, but you can't be as sure. You don't have an image, and you're not really quite sure what it's going to be. It probably isn't going to be as good as your favorite food. So if you're going for anticipated pleasure, you should get your favorite food. How about the experience? If you're going for the experience, you should go for your favorite food because you know it's going to be a great experience. The other one is going to be good, but you don't know how good because, you know, some foods are better than others. But if you're going for remembered pleasure, now you should go for the new food because if you get your favorite food, which you've had 20 times, let's say, the 21st time will add nothing to your memory. It's going to merge with all the other ones, right? Whereas you're going to get a new memory if you eat a new food. So our idea is, and we're working on this, that people who privilege memory, who think building memories is really important, are going to go to make choices in their lives which emphasize new experiences, where people who are more interested in the anticipation of events will go the other way. Okay, now, and by the way, just for the record, we've done this with concerts, with a lot of other things besides food. Okay, I'm going to skip by a lot of details. I just want to go to the music part now. Now, if we look at the cultural evolution of the Western meal, most of it comes from France. It's that format with some modifications, and it's now morphing into this, the tasting menu. And most of the chefs at this, who are the cutting edge of the field, do tasting menus. Between 15 and 34 little courses in a row. You have no choice. You just sit there and the food comes. There's no choice at all. Well, if you have an allergy, they'll fix something for you. They don't like it, but they will. All right. We've asked people, what is your favorite course in the Western meal? And for French and Americans, the answer is the main course, clearly. I asked the chefs, just by show of hands, what is your favorite course? And appetizer won, like 80% of them said appetizer. So that's an interesting point. And that's because the great creativity in a menu is in the appetizer. And besides, if you eat appetizers, you can get more different kinds of food because they're smaller. Okay, now let's look at the cultural evolution of the symphony, or the concert. It used to be overture, classical music, symphony. Some of you probably don't know this, but overture, symphony, maybe an intermission, I should say that, a second symphony. But now, with popular music, there's nothing like that anymore. You've got an album, or better yet, you don't need an album. You can just pick the songs you want. You're unconstrained, right? If you've got an album, it's like a tasting menu, because then you have a set of things in order. Okay, so what's happened is that music and food have evolved in the same way to be a selection of short things rather than a very programmed set of events. Okay, and you all know the peak-end rule, which only holds under some conditions, by the way. Its generality is exaggerated, but the idea is that you remember best the high point of an event. We're talking about, this is almost all on negative events, by the way, almost the entire peak-end literature. But if you apply it to positive events, it would be the most exciting thing and the last thing of what you remember best. So now we have an issue, and I just want to take you on a very quick tour of the greatest restaurant of the last, probably century, last 100 years, El Bulli, which I had one meal at. It's now closed, unfortunately. Ferran Adria is the chef, and he is the Mozart or Picasso or whatever you want of cuisine. I mean, he has changed cuisine. And the audience was just totally changed because of him. So you go there. This was a 34-course meal. It took 6 hours, and I wasn't stuffed. at the end. First course, you get a lime juice, rum, poured into liquid nitrogen, and it freezes immediately into something like you've never had before. It's not crystalline. When you freeze something very rapidly, it has a different texture. It's smooth and wonderful. Then it's taken out and served in a little lime, and you have a little bit, okay? Here is another course. This is, he calls it caviar. It's not caviar. It's made of cantaloupe, ground cantaloupe, and you drop it into an agar gel base, and a little membrane of agar, of seaweed, falls around it. So it just looks like caviar, and it has a little membrane, but when you bite it, it squirts out like caviar does. Just a total surprise, and he puts it in the caviar container because there's a lot of humor in this cuisine. Here is the single best, most interesting dish I think I ever had. It's a very simple dish. It's extract of pine nuts. You know pine nuts? They're very subtle flavor. Here's some over here. Extract, as strong as you could get it, steaming hot, in a glass that is coated with ice. When you drink it, it's cold because it goes over the ice, but it has all the aroma of something hot. Now, you have never had anything that was cold and aromatic because cold suppresses evaporation. He figured out how to give you a combination of wonderful experiences in one thing, and it was just so simple. There was an intermission in this meal. Not just a break, but we went from outside, the first 10 or 15 courses, to inside. I just want to show you one more course. I have a picture of every course, and I show my class this when I teach my food course. This is sushi, very good sushi, and that little thing over there on the right is a can of ginger spray. And what you do, and this is my son, by the way, who's the co-author of this, you spray your mouth with ginger, and then you eat the sushi. So he's reversed the normal experience where the ginger arises from the food, and here it precedes it. And it's not just different, it's great. Because this guy is an artist as well as a scientist. So my son became a molecular gastronomer at this meal. Very few people have a picture of one of their children at the moment, the very moment that their life changed. And this was this moment. Okay, so he's a music. So what can you learn from music? One is music tends to, especially classical music, but pop music ends with a bang, right? It ends with a coda, we call it in class. You know, something exciting. Another thing about music, it is built on affective contrast. Loud, soft, you know, fast, slow, within even a short period of time. That's true of much pop music too. Thirdly, it's built on repetition. The same theme keeps coming back over and over again. And it's built on the idea of theme and variation. You take something and you play with it. You vary it. None of this is in cuisine. When you eat your course, it's over. You don't get another bite of it later. You don't get a restful dish and then a sort of an exciting dish. You certainly don't, and you don't end with a bang because dessert is not the favorite course. So I said to the chefs, listen, this is hundreds of years of evolution of music. They've come to this idea. It even fits with the peak end idea. And chefs don't do theme and variation. So we said, okay, so my son started cooking, combining music. Here's a menu. He gives about 15 course. He's a professor of music. He does this once a month. He puts on a banquet for some people. So here's a meal which starts with rose petal sorbet. Then you get heirloom tomatoes 5 ways. That's theme and variation. Then there's a bunch. I won't go through all the courses. He ends it with summer peaches 5 ways. Notice he's doing a recapitulation, which they do in music all the time, where he's taking the same, and then he starts with a plum clove float. So he's taking the beginning and sort of recapitulating at the end like music does. And here's an example. Here is tomato. Served 5 ways, and you eat this in a particular order. A roasted tomato, and then you go around the table. That's a gazpacho at the top, where the tomato is not even that obvious. So he's taking the tomato out of tomato gradually. Here's the dessert, which is a roasted peach, and he has the same thing, and that's a peach gazpacho at the top. So you're seeing a peach flavor being manipulated. So the typical meal at a good restaurant starts with, this is the affective value, how much you like it. The peak is at the middle. I'm using a 10-course tasting menu, but psychology says that you should do it this way because the beginning is best remembered. We know that from the memory literature, and the end has the most impact. So we shouldn't serve meals the way we do. And so we suggested if you have a 13-course meal, you should give people the first 12 courses and then give them the list of them and say, which one do you want again? So we can know we end with a bang. Okay? And we've been doing research on this subject now. It's actually difficult to do where we give people, this is visual because it's easier, we give them 2 really good pictures and a bunch of not good pictures, and we get people to rate the exhibit, and we look at whether it matters, whether we put the best 2 things at the middle or the beginning, and we also are doing work on contrast. Is it good to have something very good and something not so good and very good, not so good, rather than lumping them, all the good ones and all them? These are subtle effects, and I'm not going to bother you with that. I just want to tell you that at the end of my talk, this is not a picture of the end, this was later. Ferran Adrià, the world's greatest chef, who was my idol. I have 2 or 3 idols. Solomon Asch is another one. This is my food idol. Comes up to me and hugs me right in front of 400 people. I couldn't believe it. And I felt so, I mean, you know, imagine you're being hugged by your idol after you presented something. I mean, it was just too good to be true. Okay, now, total change. Not the pleasure of eating anymore. Carol Nemiroff's a former graduate student of mine. I'll have to tell you one thing that she found that is going to be relevant to everything else I say, and that's the idea of spiritual contagion. The idea that not only is it true that if something touches something else, it makes it something bad, like a cockroach or Hitler, touches it, makes it bad, and you won't eat it. But for some people and some objects, you can't get rid of it. You can, so say Hitler's sweater. For most people, you can take Hitler's sweater, you can wash it, you can unweave it, you can do anything you want. You can dye it, and it doesn't matter. It's got Hitler in it, and it's not a physical thing. It's what we call spiritual contagion. So for some people, you can wash it out. Most people, you can't. Whereas for many people, you can wash a cockroach out. Cockroaches are not as spiritual as Hitler. That you can see why I like Hitler now. The only way we can make, the only chance we have for most people of making Hitler's sweater wearable is to fight Hitler with the opposite moral force. Put it on Mother Teresa. Say, we don't do this, of course, but say, we have Hitler's sweater, you won't wear it. Suppose Mother Teresa wears it for a week. Well, at least she's, you know, the opposite spiritual force from Hitler, and for some people that works. Okay, now, I want to take a quick tour on water. I've been interested in water because I'm interested in disgust, and there is something called recycled water, which you may not, you're not a water-short country, but for water-short countries like the American Southwest and much of the world, Australia, lots of places, water is in very short supply. And the best way ecologically to handle this is to take water waste and process it directly into pure water. It's called recycled water. And the reason that's good is because it's not a very expensive technique, and it produces better quality water than your tap water. But it's very close to the sewage that it started with, so people think it's disgusting. Now, you understand that all water you drink is water that was in someone's toilet somewhere down the line, right? Because it's just a matter of whether it goes up and rains down and all this, but it's you know, it's all got that. In fact, I don't want to make you feel bad, but I want to tell you that every time you drink a glass of water, you drink at least a few molecules that went through Adolf Hitler's body. And, you know, you're not going to stop drinking water. I mean, you know, by the way, that's not true for Americans. It takes 2,000 years for water to equilibrate around the world. So we drink Moses, as you do, but we don't drink, we get some Hitler, but we're not as sure about that. Okay, so technology is available, it's efficient, and there's a lot of opposition to it. The American Southwest is a big opposition, and their motto is toilet to tap, meaning you're just basically drinking sewer water. And this is very counterproductive because it's really a good technique, and they're short of water in the Southwest. And it's a dedicated minority who are really upset about this. But in a free country like yours or ours, if you're a dedicated minority with some funding and a couple of good lawyers, you can stop progress for decades. So we're interested in dealing with that problem. So this is a survey of a real sample of Americans waiting in train stations in 5 cities around the United States. We told them what recycled water is, and then we said, would you be willing to drink it? Only 13% said no. The big group is uncertain. They're not sure if they drink it. So if it was just a matter of a democracy, we could probably get this in. But when you have a dedicated minority, it's a difficult thing. So I just want to say one thing. So we've done a lot of measures on these people. I'm going to not tell you this because it would take too long. But let me just tell you, for the people who say no, we say, well, how about drinking this kind of water? We say water that we evaporate, for example. We take sewer water, we evaporate it, it's pure water, we condense it, and then we give it to you. They say, absolutely not. That's better than their tap water. They love their tap water. We can make water much better than their tap water, and they won't touch it. So we call this evidence insensitivity. There are, and you'll see this again, there's almost a moral opposition to this. There's something wrong with doing this. And these people, there's no point in trying to convince them that it's better water than the water they drink. That's not relevant. Okay, now let's, this is so short. One of the other sides of water is that bottled water became a big success in the United States. It's totally astonishing. I like Europe better than the United States. But one of the things I was proud of is that we didn't drink bottled water because it's silly. But we started drinking, look at this. This is the gallons of bottled water drunk in the United States. In 1980, no one was drinking bottled water. We're now paying more than we pay for gas per ounce for bottled water, which is demonstrated to be no better than our tap water. And I don't understand it, but if it's like other things, which it probably is, we're going to have water stores soon, Maison de l'eau, and you're going to have things like, 1997 first winter runoff water, and people are going to do what they do when they get a new product. And here's one that says, not a spring water, no cholesterol, no fat, no calories, or we even have here, not from concentrate. And of course, the next step is dehydrated water, right? Well, just add water and you have it. Okay, so, okay. Now I want to address the world food security problem, because some of the same issues are going to come up. The world food security problem is that, the population is growing. We are pushing the land to get enough food. We keep cutting down jungle to get, areas to raise cows and things, raise animals. And much of the world doesn't get enough food and is protein poor. And is there a solution? And the answer, yes, there is a solution. And the solution is to start eating insects. Insects solve the world food insecurity problem, as I'll show you in a moment. But the problem is people think of eating insects. Here we go again with taking the mouths of you. They don't want an insect to go into their mouth. It's disgusting. And so the question is just like the water that was, but doesn't make any, there's no reason for it. Insects are not toxic. They're not particularly, you can cook them if they were, but they're not major microbe carriers, most of them. And they're good food. Okay, so they're offensive. So just a quick thing on this, guys. Insects are inherently offensive. It's their insectness that makes them bad. Because if you boil them and do anything you want to kill everything, and the people still don't want them. Okay, they're contaminating. The cockroaches are standard contaminant. We drop it into a glass of water, we take it out, nobody will drink the water, even if it's a heat-sterilized cockroach. Okay, and by the way, this is not present in little children. Little children will eat. At about age 3 or so, they stop eating insects, but they don't find them contaminating till age 5. That is, they'll drink water if it's okay, put an insect in, take it out. And basically, as a rough, pretty general law, we heard about laws of emotion yesterday, animal foods are disgusting around the world. There are only a few exceptions. Almost everybody finds almost all animal food disgusting. So insects, there's nothing special about insects. But if you're too close to us, you are disgusting. That's pets and primates, but we wouldn't want to eat them. And if you're very far from us, things like insects, we think that's disgusting. But lots of the things that are in the middle are. So for example, and we know, by the way, that you will get used to insects. There's no question about it that if people started eating insects, a week later or a month later, they'd be happy and they'd be fine. So the problem is to get them started. People don't believe in adaptation. They don't understand that you get used to things. You've gotten used to the fact that you're breathing the water, the air that you're breathing out right now. And that's okay. She's okay. But I mean, you wouldn't want her to breathe in your mouth, right? But the point is, you're used to it because that's life. And, you know, you're also used to drinking water with a few molecules of Hitler in it. I doubt that any of you are going to stop drinking your water. Okay. So here is this, just to give you a sense. This is with Americans. It's a little different in Europe, but not very. Consumed animal species is a percent of total animal species. These are mammals. There are over 4,000 mammals. How many of those do we eat? That's a graph. This is the ones we don't consume. That's the ones we consume. Practically none of them. How about consumed animal species as a percent of total animal species in the USA? Okay, not just, that's even tinier. That number is a fraction of a small fraction of 1%. So we're finding almost everything. You don't want to eat bats. You don't want to eat rats. Those are rats. Rodents are the biggest group of mammals. You don't want to eat snakes. You don't want to eat any amphibians. I mean, it's ridiculous. We eat a few little animals. So the question isn't why do we find insects disgusting? It's why do we not find beef disgusting? Okay? And Matt Ruby and I are working on this whole issue of how humans' relations to meat. He may or may not give a talk here about it later in the year. Okay, this is simulated data. But just to say, I don't have that. But the idea is that there are things like, in this case of America, cow, pig, and lamb. Sorry, this is hard to read. This is the percent of people. This is a rating of deliciousness. Remember, I made up this data. But the idea is we like those three. And as soon as you get out of that, all the other animals you can think of, insects, bats, rodents, wolves, dogs, cats, monkeys, they're all disgusting. So what's interesting is just these three. Okay? And by the way, and we only eat the muscle of those animals. In America, you eat some other things. We won't eat liver, we won't eat kidney. I mean, we're just taking the muscle of three animals. It's nothing compared to all the animals. The rest of it's disgusting. So I got involved in working on insects because they are the solution. And I got involved, I was on the board of a group in Copenhagen called the Nordic Food Lab, which is working on making insects delicious. They're affiliated with the restaurant Noma. And when I got to the first meeting of 6 of us, including a great chef and a bunch of entomologists, I realized, my God, this is the solution to the world's food problem. So I said, I'm going to work on that. So I've been collaborating with 2 people, Chris Chan, who just got his undergraduate honors thesis on this, and Matt Ruby, who is a postdoctoral fellow, works on vegetarianism, and he's very interested in this as well. So we've done 2 studies now, and I just want to mention a few things. The subjects come from Amazon Mechanical Turk samples, which are internet users who like to take surveys. They're not a representative sample, but they're better than college students, I think, to get a sense of what a country is like. And it so happens that in India, half the people speak English, and they like computers. So if you post something for them, you can get a few hundred in a day, at paying relatively little because their cost of living is much lower. So we're talking about samples of 200 to 300 of each. Okay, demographics, mostly these are mostly middle-class people. Their mean age is in the 30s, and in the US, they're 60% female. In India, they're 40% female. Just culture difference of some sort here. Okay, so it's not a random sample. But we're not interested in estimates of incidence. We're interested in what relates to people's attitudes to insects, okay? So I'm just going to do a few things. First of all, willingness to eat insects. 18% of Americans say they would never eat. This is what they say, not what they'll do. 18% say they'll never eat insects. 8.8 say only if my life depended on it. I'm sure that's true of this group too. And the rest of them are open to possibility. So about half of Americans are willing to say, well, you know, who knows. And the Indians are more negative. Of course, remember that 20-some% of them, it depends on how you define it, but 20 to 30% are vegetarians. And anyway, so 63% say never. So it's a smaller group there, but we have other data suggesting that we can get them to respond positively just by asking the question differently. Okay, here is the maximum tolerable percent insect flour, which we explained, it's just ground dried insects. You would accept the maximum percent in a food that you like. And you can see that distribution. Again, there's more negativity on the Indians, but now we've got about a quarter of the Indians saying they'll take some. A third of them will say they take some, and more of the Americans. Our strategy is to sneak insects into food, telling people, but insect flour, I should tell you, insects are not strong tasting. They're very tasty. They're very nutritive. They have nice texture if they're things like grasshoppers, and they don't have a strong taste, a little bit nutty. Okay. This is a restaurant in New York. Mexicans eat a lot of insects. This is tacos with grasshoppers in them. It's served in restaurants, but usually fancy restaurants. I won't go through this. We have a complicated measure of how acceptable insects are. We use a lot of things. We ask people how willing they would eat that, how willing they eat an Indian dish would have it, a lot of different things. It's complicated, and I won't bother you. This is a mean acceptance score, and the only thing I want to mention is we did 2 studies. The score comes out higher in the U.S. than India for acceptance, this complicated measure. Okay. Now we ask people to assume there's no toxicity. Insects have been heat sterilized, certified safe to eat, and consider the insect that would be most acceptable to you and assume that it is prepared whole and roasted. Okay? That's what we tell them. Now, would you rather eat an insect or eat raw goat meat? We're just trying to get them to place it. So you see, 47% of the Indians would rather eat an insect than raw goat meat. They eat goat meat in India. We don't. 75% of Americans would rather eat an insect than eat raw goat meat. So there are a lot of things around that are an insect. How about eating raw fish? I won't bother with that. But now we have, how would you rather eat an insect or endure 10 minutes of moderate pain? And we ask a whole bunch of things like this, and you can see that 30% of the Indians would rather eat an insect than endure the pain, and 53% of the Americans. So we can place this in their world of aversion. It's not the worst thing in the world, by their own definition. Okay. Now, nobody has looked at this problem. Nobody. So I was looking at similar problems. I worked on the acceptance of chili pepper in the world. It comes from Mexico. It's very popular, not here, but in most of the world. In most of Asia, West Africa. It's a major part of food. And I studied that for a while because it tastes bad when you first taste it. It's not like insects, which don't taste bad. And the other thing, so the story of chili pepper in the United States is and in most of the world, it's bottom up. That is to say, in America, it's the Hispanic immigrants who ate the hot pepper, the poor, relatively poor people, and their restaurants came up around, and people started trying it, and it came from that. And in most of the world, what happened is they already liked the burn because they had black pepper, which also burns your mouth, but it's much more expensive than chili pepper. And when they got chili pepper, they could get their burn without that. Okay, and then we have another story. We have sushi, which is become extremely popular in the United States. And sushi is a disgusting food. It's raw fish. Most people would say raw fish is disgusting. They certainly would have said it 50 years ago. Now they're not so sure. So we've had a disgusting food become part of our diet, and that's top down. Sushi came from fancy restaurants in Los Angeles, okay, which started eating it. And then it spread from upper business people and all that to the rest of the country. I don't want to go through this. This just says that sushi is the 10th most favorite food in the United States by this international survey. Here's the mention of sushi in the English language. This stuff on Google Ngram doesn't show very well. That's sushi up there. See, it's starting about in the 1970s, and it's just coming up. Okay, I just want to quickly say a few more things. There are 3,850 sushi restaurants in the United States now. And what's interesting is that there's great other Japanese food. This is yakitori. It's great, and it's easy to eat. I mean, it's a wonderful food. We don't eat that. We don't eat all the other good Japanese food. The one we like is the most disgusting one. If you'd asked me 50 years ago, which Japanese food would Americans adopt, I would say, I'm not sure it'll be a noodle dish or yakitori. It certainly won't be sushi. So this is very encouraging for the Noma, this great restaurant. When you give a talk at that meeting, you get a free dinner at Noma, which is about a $300 deal. It's very nice. And I had a 27-course meal there. The chef of Noma was a student of Adria, and here is one of the dishes. That is live ants in a tasty green sauce. You know, they didn't ask you if you wanted it. You didn't have to eat it, but it just came out, and I ate it. It was pretty good. I wouldn't say it was the best dish in the dinner, but it was interesting. This is the Nordic Food Lab, which is floating on the water right next to the restaurant. Okay. who eats sushi? Well, this is a technique that I want you to be aware of because it's very useful. This is a big data technique. This data comes from work done at the Positive Psychology Center at Penn, and they are mining all the tweets of the world, and they can do word frequencies in any country, how often they say happy, satisfied, and whatever. And they also, on 77,000 of these people, Americans, they have a full sample. They have they filled out demographic things. They've even taken the Big Five, and they've got all sorts of other information. And most of them have given them access to their emails, so they can really get a lot of data on these people. So this is the frequency of the mention of the word sushi, percent of all the words they use in all these communications as a function of age, and that's this blue thing. And you'll see that what's interesting here is that sushi is max in the 20s. See that? The old folks don't like it too much. Little kids don't. So we can see that there's a sort of a target audience here at this point in time. There may be a cohort effect, that is, that bump may move as these people get older. But that's sort of interesting. Just for control, here's tacos, where you see the older people don't like that either. These are mostly non-Hispanic. And here's meat, which is pretty steady. Okay. This took 5 minutes to get, this data. Okay. Target population. In the West are Western rejectors, people who won't eat insects but are not really saying they'd never eat it. But in the developing world, there are different estimates. Between 500 million and 2 billion people on Earth eat insects regularly. It's hard to get an accurate number, but it's certainly at least 500 million. The biggest density is in Southeast Asia. So for those people, we don't have to get them to like insects. Not only do they eat them, they like them. They're not a starvation food. They're a favorite food, okay? Most commonly roasted, but not always. They don't make insect flour. They eat the insects so you can see them. But the biggest group of people is the developing world non-consumers, people who don't eat insects, but they need protein. And insects are animal protein, a high-quality protein. Not only are they high-quality protein, they're great for the environment, by the way, because you don't take much space to farm insects. You don't need to cut down whole bunches of forests. They're very efficient. They're more efficient at turning plant to animal protein than any animal that we eat, by far. Okay. And so our interest is in making contacts in the third world, in the developing world, to explore two things. One is, what is their reaction to insects? Are they, for example, disgusted? If the people who eat insects, are they disgusted by any insect other than the ones they eat? As we are about any mammal other than the one. So they just have this little window of acceptable insects? So are they just like us when it's a cockroach or something? There are people who eat cockroaches, but there's even cockroach, believe it or not, toothpaste in South China. And the other thing for the people who eat insects is they don't farm them. There's almost no people in the world, there are a couple of exceptions, who farm insects. Even though they're short of protein, they eat insects. They farm other things. And we're puzzled about why don't they farm insects? So we want to do some field work. And there are little kits you can buy that will farm them in your backyard. Usually it's crickets or mealworms. Those are the two most common forms of farming. Okay, so just for the record, people find ants most acceptable to eat. We ask them, what insects would you eat if you had to? And cockroaches last. I didn't fill the middle in because it's not the same for in the United States, but they're both the same on this. And we asked them the most acceptable form, and the highest ranked form by almost everybody is insect flour, not pureed insects, not chopped insects, not whole insects. So this suggests that for acceptance in places that don't eat insects, you should go that way. And we've also shown, I won't bother to go take it, that people are more willing to eat animals that eat insects than to eat insects themselves. And there is a whole market now for animal insect feeds, to feed chickens and other animals with insects. So that's another approach. Oh, that's the same thing. But I want to talk about one interesting insect. There's one special insect, group of insects, and that's the butterflies, because we like butterflies. So here is, we ask people to three words, India and the United States. First three words that come to mind when you think of insects, and later, first three words that come to mind when you think of butterfly. We get the words and we tabulate them. This is a really good technique, by the way, to get a culture sense. It isn't very good for individuals because there's a lot of noise in what they say, just what they happen to think about just now. But for a group, it's quite reliable. So for insects, only 3% of we have about 900 words here, three from 200 to 300 people. 3% of the words are positive. For insect, the U.S., 2%, 34% of 42% are negative. So insects are very negative. As you know, those of you know the IAT, insect is the prototypical negative object. But if you ask them about butterflies, 30% use positive words, and nobody uses a negative word at all. And 40% of Indians use a positive word, nobody uses a negative word. So we all love butterflies, and we hate the rest of the group. But here's what's interesting. If we, I won't skip this for time. Okay, let me mention this one. So we asked people, is it, for 6 kinds of insects, this is only the data on butterflies. For India and the United States, blue is India, green United States. Is it immoral to kill? This is an agree-disagree scale, -100 to +100. 0 is neither agree nor disagree. So if it's over 0, you agree. Is it immoral to kill a butterfly? Notice they're above 0. Are butterflies good? Just good or bad? 100 is good. They're good. Is it okay to harm butterflies? No, but here's the interesting one. Is it okay to eat butterflies? No. And they're as bad as ants and grasshoppers. So they're like puppy dogs. We love them, and we wouldn't want to eat them. So we've got this interesting case within the insect world of a really positive thing that people are disgusted by eating. I'll skip the cricket here. Okay, so we've done a whole bunch. We've asked a lot of questions. We did a factor analysis so we could get into a journal. We have a disgust factor. This is some of the items. The idea of eating makes me nauseous. The idea of eating insects makes me ill, and so on. And we have other things. But I just want to show you one thing. The disgust factor, which is how disgusting are insects for you, correlates -0.73 with insect acceptance. It's really strong. The more disgusted you are by insects, the less acceptable. And we use trait disgust, which is not disgust in insects, but just how disgust sensitive you are in general. It's a -54 correlation. And here's my favorite finding, I think. Frequency of consuming sushi is positive 0.51 with acceptability of insects. So, because a lot of people don't like sushi, but those are the guys that you want to get because they've already overcome a disgust. Okay, I'm going to just stop here. Oh, one other thing. We asked this interesting question. If I ate an insect, I would want my friends to know. And the answer is 54% both. In other words, you're proud of it. It's like I went somewhere in a difficult place, or I climbed a difficult mountain or something. So there's this sort of and we have correlations to show the sensation seeking and stuff like that go with this. Okay, so the best target is a young person if you want to get someone to die, who's male, who's low in disgust, we know is high in sensation seeking, low in food neophobia, hungry, that's a good one, and has few alternatives. Those would sort of get you the person to start doing it. And so and use ant insect flour from what we know. And so I told all these people, entomologists, that's what they should do. Now, I'm just going to skip right on to the next thing, which is, okay, my last subject. This is one that's right at your heart, and this is one of the biggest American-European differences in the food area. We eat most of our grain products are probably almost all of them. We don't label foods that have genetically modified organisms, but almost all of it is genetically modified. And as you know, the EU has legally forbidden it. So why? What's going on here? So this is done work with Sydney Scott. She was an undergraduate when she started this, but she's still doing this. And she's my major collaborator on this. Okay, people think, we have to start with it, people think natural is good. In Europe, and we've done this in numbers of countries, including Germany, they like natural. It's a positive word. I'm not going to share. If you ask them to free associate to natural, you get beauty, wonder, everything, safe. Okay, so they're thinking that, but there's also that. There are volcanoes. That's natural. No. Monsanto did not get that volcano to erupt. And if you look around the world, there are this is one random week of natural disasters in the world. They're all over the place. You read about them. Where did people get the idea that nature is wonderful? I think it's a 19th, 20th century idea in the Western world. Bruce Ames, who's a terrific biochemist, very eminent, has written a paper. He's done a lot of research on this, but he has a beautiful paper in Science in 1989, short and very readable, showing, I think, conclusively that the cancer risk from natural pesticides made by plants to protect themselves from insects is greater than the cancer risk from sprayed pesticides. And not only that, but when you spray pesticides on a plant, you inhibit their making their own because the insects don't bite them, so they don't make more. When they're attacked by insects, they make more plant pesticides. I've tried to convince people who are against pesticides about this, and they don't even consider it. They say that's out of this, that's ridiculous, you know? That's like saying that British cuisine is better than French cuisine. I mean, you don't even discuss it. Okay, here are the 7 deadliest chemical compounds in the world, and you'll notice that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 7 are natural. So where is this idea that nature isn't trying to kill us, but nature isn't interested in us? Nature is part of the evolutionary scheme. Every organism is doing what it can to survive, and sometimes that means making a toxin. Okay. An interesting thing about that, we asked people in all these countries. I have German data, which I haven't yet analyzed because I'm not fluent enough in German by any means to deal with it. So this is just French, US, UK. We asked people we asked them first, define natural. And the 2 most common things that come up are no additives and in its original form. Okay, so, and it turns out that if you analyze what they say, in 1/3 of the people there's about 150 people in this sample, in each country, 45, random sample, 45, 1/3 of them mention no additives. And 2 people mentioned no subtractives. That is, taking something out of something natural doesn't seem to hurt it, but adding something to it seems to be terrible. Now, that's totally ridiculous, right? I mean, either way, you're destroying the naturalness. Okay, we call this additivity dominance. We've done a fair amount of work on it that I won't tell you. We're just trying to understand how people think in the West. We're going to be doing Asian and African later. Okay, we asked people, how natural is something? We give them a scale. 100 is a tree growing on the top of a mountain in the Andes, but nobody has ever been up that mountain. It's as natural as you can get, and 0 would be a plastic toy gun. It's doubly unnatural, right? It's a gun and it's plastic. Okay, how natural is a wolf? I don't have the number, but we're using that as a reference. It's in the 90s for how natural a wolf is. How about a German Shepherd dog? It's 12% less natural. Okay. How about a Cocker Spaniel? It doesn't look anything like a wolf. There's nothing in nature that looks like a Cocker Spaniel. Do you know that dog? Or if you don't, some dog like it. Only 15% down. Now we say, how about, I'm using the wrong button. How about a wild animal with 1 gene inserted? It's 54% less natural. Now that's very close to the wild animal. Most of the time, you wouldn't even see the difference when someone inserted a gene. It's in resistance or something. So that kills it, kills naturalness, but breeding it for hundreds of years and really changing it doesn't change naturalness much. Okay, so I have these are my dogs, and they're not natural. I don't have any problem with that, but people who are going in their supermarket, well, this is not you can't bring dogs in a supermarket. This is not a supermarket. But if you go someplace where in a market, street market, with dogs like that, and you only buy organic food, I mean, what are you saying? Okay, so here's results from a study. We have spring water. It comes right out of the ground. You drink it, and there's no minerals in it. People rate it on average 92 natural on the 100. Totally natural, 0 not natural scale. How about we add 1.1% minerals from other spring water? It's an additive, you'll notice, but it's natural. It's down to 69. Now you take that out. So you're back over here. It's less natural. So now you've got what you started with, but you poked in twice. And it turns out that poking in is the problem. It's not the content. Because people say to us all the time, They don't care if the commercial and the organic are exactly the same chemically. They don't want the chemical, the synthesized one. It's the fact that humans were in there, but they don't mind humans being in there to make a Cocker Spaniel, or to make their corn, or to make their carrots, or to make almost everything they eat. Okay, so turns out if you like natural, this is a scale of natural, how much you prefer natural to unnatural thing, where this would be indifferent, the red line. This is American subjects. So we asked them, generally speaking, how much do you think natural foods are better for health? Big jump over that. There's not much evidence for that, practically none. That it's better for the environment, they think that it's better in taste, there's no evidence for that it tastes better. That it makes you look better, that it's good for your complexion, no evidence for that. And we even get that it's got more essential amino acids, certainly not true. And it's better for fair trade, for free trade. Has nothing to do with it. But this is a halo effect. If it's natural, everything good goes with it. Okay, so now I want to turn to, given that baseline, let's talk about opposition to, how many of you here are opposed to genetically engineered food in your diet, or in the European diet? Should be most of you. How many of you aren't opposed? Okay, well, by the way, I'd say about half of Americans are opposed. They just don't care that much. It's like, most American males, most mature American males, not students, think they're overweight, but they don't care. Their wives think they're overweight, and they do care, and so the wives are dieting, and the husbands say, well, that's the way it goes. So it's a lot of Americans are sort of opposed to this, but it's not at the top of their agenda. They're more worried about Iran or taxes or something else. Okay, so Lynn Frewer and Michael Segrist, among others, have done a lot of work related to the ideas and thoughts that are involved in thinking about technology. Michael Segrist is at the University of Zurich. Some of his students may be here. Is anyone here from his group? Okay. And Lynn Frewer in UK. So this is the work I did with Sidney Scott and another psychologist, Joel Imbar. And one of the things we discover is, first of all, when people talk about genetically modified organisms, they talk about risks, and they never talk about benefits. There are very substantial benefits. Now, you may say that the risks outweigh them, but you should at least recognize that there are benefits. Okay, so human progress would not have occurred. We would be almost back in the caves if we took the attitude that most genetically modified organism opponents take. That is almost virtually every great step that humans have made in progress, things that you love, like antibiotics, like printing presses, like computers, that would have been rejected on the grounds that are used to oppose genetically modified organisms. I'll come back to that in a moment. There's a tremendous European-American disjunction on this. Much more in the law than in the people, by the way. The people aren't as different. Our laws are totally friendly to this, and voters in numbers of states have even voted down labeling food as genetically modified, which is a little puzzling. Okay, here is some data from a sample of 1,000 people from each of 6 countries. I have 4 of them here. Percent strongly opposed to consuming GE foods, strongly opposed. There are a fair number of Americans who are slightly opposed. So you see this big effect here. The UK, in all of our data, by the way, we do a lot of comparisons. UK is always between continental Europe and US. They're sort of like half American, half continental. Maybe you knew that already. So one of the things that interests us is Americans are terribly afraid of food. They are constantly worried. I won't get to that in my talk. That was the last topic, comparing them to the French. But they're just phobic about food. Why the hell are the Europeans so upset about this particular feature of food, and the Americans don't care? Americans are not less pro-natural than the Europeans. So it's really puzzling. We don't have the answer to this, and maybe some of you in Zurich will be looking at this too. We're going to be starting to look at European samples and also Indians and a few others. So here's a silly theory, but it's one that you only have so many things you can worry about. We're worried about germs, salt, toxins, fat. Europeans don't worry so much about it, so they got a lot of worry space. I mean, you're worried about mad cow a lot. We didn't worry at all about mad cow. Maybe you've got lots of worry space to devote to this because, you know, you don't worry about everything in your life. You only worry about the most important things. So we've got our space full. Okay. Now, interesting thing about GMO, opposition to GMO it's across the political spectrum in the United States. But the opposition of the political left is particularly interesting because the political left is opposed because they hate Monsanto and because they think it's, you know, depriving people of opportunities and so on. But the interesting thing is that it's also true that the American left is more worried about the starving people in the world than the American right. And the great benefit of GMOs is not for Americans, it's for Africans, because they can get much higher yield per acre where they're short of food. So the American left should be for that piece of them should be for it because it's helping the people that they think the right pays no attention to. On the other hand, they're opposed because Monsanto's involved in all these other things. And we find that a lot of the people, Americans, we haven't done this yet with Europeans, are evidence insensitive. That is, it's just like the water thing. There's no point in arguing with them about really there are benefits of this, and you know there's really no evidence that there's no evidence at all for harmfulness. It's all potential worry. There's no actual data on any problem. Okay? So, but you say that and they say, yes, but think about this, think about that. And it doesn't work much. In our American sample, we were surprised at how much of the opposition in America, which is about half the population is opposed, say if they have to choose, how much of it is moral? They think it's not right to do this. It's not right. And so, for example, okay, so we separated the two groups of opponents in America to the moral opponents and the people who just say it's too dangerous. You know, there's a lot of things you don't do because it's too dangerous. Remember, these same people are fine with domestication. They don't want to give up their corn. They don't want to give up their wheat. They don't want to give up their meat. But this is, so it's like the natural thing. There's a certain kind of intervention of humans, but another kind is fine. Okay. And we have shown that it's the moral opponents of GMOs in America who find it disgusting, who use the word disgusting for it to describe it. The others don't. They just say unsafe. Okay, just quickly. They're evidence insensitive. This is an 853 American, this is a representative sample of Americans, not an internet sample. Just quickly, 36% of them are supporters. Oh, there's something called sacred values. That's an idea that, among others, Tetlach have come up, or protected values. That's what John Barron's term is. These are things that you don't compromise on. It's like your belief in God. They're not, you know, they're axioms. So these are the questions to ask. I do not oppose this. It's in the negative form because that's the way they wrote it. So someone who's morally opposed says, yes, no, I do not, it's double negative, unfortunately. No, I do not oppose it. And yes, this should be prohibited no matter how great the benefits and minor the risks from allowing it. So people that say it's not a matter of evidence, those are the people we call moralized opponents. We have other measures too. 45% of Americans are moralized opponents. I suspect that number is larger in Europe. They think it's wrong. Okay? All right, now, we're almost done, folks. What correlates with being an opponent to GMOs? Well, first of all, of course, people who are opponents are more likely to want restrictions of public access to GMOs. Overall, this is not just the moral ones, the more risky people think it is, the more they're opposed. But there's not a significant negative correlation with benefits. It's negative, but not. So it's much more the risks than the benefits. And trust in institutions, which this may be coming from Michael Segrist, I forgot. We've used a number of his scales on technology. Okay, but if we do a regression, risk and disgust independently predict people's support for public restriction of access. How disgusted they are by it and how risk independently supported. The other factors fall out of the regression. Okay, now, and disgust and predicting even if we get rid of all the demographic stuff. So I want to just close with this. Corn, now, this isn't the right food for you because you're not big corn eaters, though you eat more than most people in Europe, by the way. But, you know, corn is mostly an animal food in Europe. It's a major food around the world. Corn is the most efficient food in the world. If you want calories per acre, you go for corn. That's why a lot of it's grown in Africa. And a lot of genetic engineering has got to do with corn. The original form of corn is teosinte. It looks like this. And this is what you know. Big difference. The size is right here, by the way. Okay? So humans did a lot. A lot of this domestication was in Mexico before Europeans got there. So you've got this enormous change. By the way, it's only, as far as we know, about 6 genes that have changed in all of this. It's fascinating. Okay, so people think that this is natural. Okay, so here's what I want to do for you. Gudrun just gave me 2 days ago something from the web about opposing genetic engineering. You know, genin technique, huh? Gen technique? Gain technique. And you know, it was a persuasive piece, not a piece of science. But I went through, there were 10 reasons. One of them was, you don't know how it will affect the genome. I'm going to tell you that if we didn't have any domesticated food at all, and someone said, I'm going to breed corn, take this stuff and make it easier to get, more calories and all that stuff, easy to harvest, and you could say this, well, we don't know how it will affect the genome. Yeah, that's for sure. It will harm the ecological balance. Certainly that would be a reasonable complaint against any domestication. How about, you don't know its effect on human health? Well, we didn't know it because we didn't have the corn, right? It might affect antibiotic resistance. Well, yeah. It can't be reversed. Well, maybe it can't. I don't know. Actually, it can, but uncertain costs for analysis and quality control. Yeah, you'd have to worry about, is this thing okay, this thing we've just bred, this corn, this wheat, this cow, this pig? It takes away consumer-free choice. Well, you can still have the natural one. Don't try to eat teosinte. It ain't worth it. You can't eat an auroch, which is the original cow, because they're extinct. It will reduce agricultural jobs. This is an argument. Yes, it will. So did computers reduce. They reduced bookstore jobs. Well, you know, that's one of the consequences of advancement. No insurance against harm. That's right. There is no insurance against harm for the printing press, for the computer, for anything. The computer is a lot more dangerous because it can spread ideas around the world, bad ideas or good ideas, whatever. You know, it's done a lot of bad things. And finally, it's patentable and it may harm the food market. Well, that's true of everything in the food store. So, what I want to say to close is that the arguments against it, regardless of whether, if you feel that this is inherently bad, like being against God, if you want to be, then it's fine. But these arguments make no sense, because you would literally be living in the caves if you took those arguments seriously. There's no evidence that genetically, at current, with a lot of work on it, a lot of stuff, most of the soybeans and corn, there's no evidence of any harm. Okay, but it's possible. So I want to close then with an interesting thing, that one of the things we have to recognize in psychology, and we haven't done it partly because we haven't studied religion much. That's another thing psychologists haven't studied. Because if you study religion, you see people who are committed to some principle, whether it's a God or it's moral principle. You don't argue with them about it. We accept it. Those of us who don't believe in God say, you believe in God? Fine. I'm not going to convince you. We have to think about some of that, more of that in our public world, this moral, so the only way, as far as I can see, you can fight, if you want to, a moral conviction is with a counter-moral conviction. Just like Mother Teresa takes care of Hitler's sweater, you want to convince the American left that people in Africa are starving because you are not letting them have this. Now, the reason Africans don't have as much as they want is because of Europe. We would be happy to give them this stuff, but Africa was, colonialized by European countries. They're much more oriented to Europe, and Europe is anti-genetically modified organisms. So the only way to deal with this at all, if you're going to make any progress, and you may not want to make progress, but if you do want to make progress with the water, with insect eating, for some people that's a moral thing too, is to just show that by their own moral principles there's a conflict here. At least make them think. So I want to close with that. I'm not going to tell you, but I'll just give you 2 sentences. French do a better job with food than Americans. It's not that their food is better. It's not necessarily better. But they love it, they enjoy it, they converse about it, they think about food as food, not as chemicals that go into their body, and they eat it in very social ways, much more than we do. They weigh less. They have more food in their mouth for longer than Americans, but they eat less calories because they chew slowly and they enjoy the thing. And we've been working on how we can import French attitudes to food to America, and the most successful way to do that is to not try to get Americans to think like the French, which is hard, but rather to get them to set their world up like the French, like to reduce portion size, to change the way the eating situation is, that the environment is much easier to change. We know from the obesity literature that it's very hard to change people, but it's easier to change the world they live in. So we're working on ways of doing that in schools and in public places. So thank you, and sorry I went a little over, but okay.